Hey guys, it's Alexander Williamson here with The Secret History, living in your aquarium. Today we are at a real stream. We are at a biotope. This is something we're going to take a look at and see what we can take from it and maybe bring back to our own aquariums. Now, this is a little stream known as Thornton Creek. Whoa, in Seattle, Washington, and apparently it has slippery rocks. Almost fell in there, but caught it. And this stream has been shaped by floods, by heavy rainfall, by humans and construction, as well as several restoration projects. Now, originally, this is a really similar stretch of stream to the way it would naturally flow. So you can see here what we have if you're trying to replicate this in your own aquarium or something of the like, an aquascape, is we've got water that is rather deep in the center, probably about a foot, and these rapids that come around. I mean, it's all very small scale. And then you've got these calm spots. Now, right at the cut bank, which is where the fastest speed of water cuts into the side of the hill here, you can actually see where on big floods and heavy flow days, it's cut through and back up into the bank there. But you are left then with not much other than stones, smooth stones, and maybe washed up or wedged debris. And then on the opposite side of a cut bank here, you are left with a very calm area. And this is where we see things like all the mulm and the leaves and the botanicals all kind of adding up and piling up, as well as you can see that there are plants and algae growing on the stones in the water here. In the center, we've got quite a bit of flow, but then any obstacle that we've got in this little creek actually provides some protection. So you've got your obstacle and then things wedged in front of it that build up more of an obstacle. They're known as loggerheads or snags. And then behind that, you actually get a buildup of very fine material like silt. And this is where sandbars and areas with riffle patterns form. Now, those riffle patterns in the sand or silt or substrate of any sort are crucial to a lot of different species of fish. So when the fast water is moving, it's too much for eggs and fish, but it aerates the tank or your aquarium if we're taking this and applying it to your own tank. So this is the equivalent of having a very heavy filter on your aquarium, having lots of flow. Then you notice there's also the botanicals and things. There is some algae and moss growing on various places and high points. And then you've got the silt and sand up along the edges, the banks. And here we've actually got a mat of its roots from plants and trees on my side of the stream, like the ferns, as well as debris that's built up, like tannins and more silt. But that is where the eggs will be laid by various species. And then coming up off of this, you get your immersed plants. So you get plants growing that can be underwater. There's things like Creeping Charlie and Creeping Jenny here. We got lots of creepers in this little park. And then we've got shaded areas, as well as areas that are exposed to the sunlight quite intensely along the pathway of this creek. Now, as this creek flows, you've got these quick areas, these rapids that flow through. And one, we already said they're bringing oxygen, but they're bringing also new water, so you're not getting a buildup of ammonia or nitrates. You're not stewing in a bathtub of your same water, essentially, which is important to note when you're thinking about your own tanks. But more importantly, it brings food by your fish. And this is why so many fish feed in different ways. You've got the food that settles out in areas like with the silt and the little teeny pebbles and where all the tannin debris is over in the calm area, which is also where generally the eggs are laid, somewhere in the silty plain area. And I don't know if you guys can see the little fish, but there are some little minnow in here. Not necessarily minnow species, I'm just calling them minnows. They're some sort of small fish, perhaps trout or perch or darters or something like that. But they're very small. And it being spring, who knows what it is? Could be a lot of things. But you can see that the finest material, sediment and things, is either right after the rapids and behind the loggerhead or calm point, or it is the opposite of the cut bank in this calm area where you've got your ripples. Then in the center, you've got rounded rocks of all different sizes, but generally the largest ones will be shaped and rounded in the center, and the ones off to the side will get smaller, and then actually oftentimes in larger scales in big full-size rivers, you'll see giant boulders, or mountains that make up the actual hillside. Pardon me, we have a ambulance going by. But in the center here, we've got, yet again, algae and lots of biofilms forming for any sort of creatures to eat. This is where the crustaceans would hide, kind of right under these overhangs and things. And again, right in here is where we would get our eggs. So if we're trying to replicate this, trying to naturally allow eggs to be hatched and laid. Hold on, I think the lens is getting a little humid, oddly enough. Then we want to replicate that by showing that there's the mulm and the algae and the biofilm, the alfuchs, but there's also areas that have enough speed that it's gone. And so you're getting enough water movement over it that you're not going to get fungus. So that's why we use egg tumblers, for instance. Now here we have some concrete slab left over that was probably from a mill. This is another area that was mined for peat moss. And we have a lake right in the middle of the city here. And again, you can see that creek flows into this lake, and there's a few beavers and otters and ducks and turtles and things like that in this lake. But it's not a big churning lake, as it were. It's definitely more of a pond ecosystem. But I think we might be able to find ourselves a turtle if we take a walk over this way. But what I want to show you also is how densely vegetated it is right on the edge of a lake or even on a river on the calm portion. You have all the stuff that washes up with the prevailing wind or the outflow of a creek or lake or stream, which is actually over there in this case. So this is just general wind and splashing has caused it to come this way. But we've got all the floating leaves and tannins and logs from storms and snags and things. And then we have cattails. We have all sorts of stuff coming all the way to the shore, and it's actually a kind of a gradual dip off in here. So that is in your tank, your edges of your tank. That's where most of the smaller fish, the kinds of fish we like to keep in a nano tank, or in most community tanks for that matter, they're going to be in this zone from somewhere out right in here, or in the creeks. They're not usually out in the open water with the big fish. They like the cover of all this. They like how chaotic it is. And so let's keep walking a little bit, and we'll also be able to see all the little bugs and things flying right near the top of the water. And so that's also important to realize, that a lot of these little fish, they don't feed like the creek fish, which are expecting bugs to come to them around the cut bank and into the slow area, or touching down like they do on lakes in the calm side areas or large wide stretches. They expect here them to be touching down from the sky and floating. So your fish that are found in this zone, you would totally expect to eat bugs and eat things that are at the top of the water, probably more predominantly than, say, worms, crustaceans, crawdads, shrimp, things like that, that in the stream would probably be under those ledges and under the opposite side of a cut bank or a loggerhead. All right, guys, so now from here, what I want to show you is the opposite bank of where that area flows out from. The creek that we were just at was coming out right over there. And you can see that there's ducks. In the main water here, we've got catfish and larger trout and things like that. But we also have logs and bigger stones, anything like a tree that hangs out over. We've got these larger bits of debris and decor if it were in your tank. But what you need to remember is that while little fish like to use that as cover, it's also what turtles, fishing predators from the land like raccoons or bobcats or bears, it's what they also all use to kind of walk out and get a grip on whatever's in the water. And they like to do that usually right near areas of high flow, because that's where the fish are hanging out, obviously. Now, the open water, you've got the ducks. So your fish are going to feel the most comfortable underneath this tiny brush, this smaller stuff, and the floating mulm and algae. And I mean, this lake is not clean, yet it's fine for fish. It's not clean by our standards of it's mucky and full of algae. But as we walk over here, it actually, you rise out of it quickly. There's not much of a transitional zone, and you rise out of it quickly, and there's kind of a choke point between one side of the pond and the other that is probably artificial, and they probably made this berm more of a berm than it is, that splits the two sides of the pond. But over here, we've got this pond, which shares any of the same fish and things. It has the same exact water properties. And this water tends to be around, boy, look how stagnant that is. Even though it is flowing slightly, you can make out that it is flowing. It sure looks stagnant, and it comes to this choke point. But this is the area where the fish are kind of waiting for both things that were in this side of the pond to make it through and follow the flow of the stream out and down into here. And so a good place to throw in the line would be actually somewhere over on this side or over here, because that's where they're going to be waiting for the floating insects or bugs or any sort of food that is coming along the route, the waterway, and following that flow. Whereas it's also fairly safe, because any sort of large predator is going to make a pretty big splash. They're going to put ripples in the water when they try to walk through this shallow area, and there isn't a sturdy bank. There's just a muddy transitional zone. So things like bass, perch, that's why they are kind of right in the cattails and the tangled area along ponds and things like this. Whereas on this side, you may expect there to be less, because the water is flowing from that creek over there towards this direction over here, and you would just expect that there are more bugs and things headed from that lake and that creek where we were towards the route of the creek, the natural path of the creek. Now there's something I want to point out to you folks right here, and this doesn't have to do with aquarium scale things, but it's kind of getting late, and so any sort of turtles are going to be done for the day most likely, and they're not in the sun anymore. But you can see that there's a log, and right where that log has its high point, the bark has been rubbed off, and that's because the turtles get up on there every day and they sun themselves. Even in this off season and when it's cooler out, they do that. And they are definitely predatory of smaller fish. So you can see the water, you can see little fish touching the water right in these shallows in the Creeping Jenny and Creeping Charlie that's growing out into the water here, as well as the bushes that hang over that produce pretty nice cover for them. So it's good to remember that not just what's in your tank, but what's over your tank counts psychologically for your fish and stress-wise for your fish. If you have bright lights, you're replicating the center of the water where the predators are. If you have, you know, diffuse light or broken up light, even more than that, bars splitting up the light, then you have there's a little whirligig bug on top of the water there. Then you have what makes them feel a little safer, because it shows them that there's something of structure above them that is not moving. So speaking of wildlife, right here we've got a rabbit. And this looks to be less of the pet rabbit that was just let go, and at least one that's been out for a couple generations with the markings like that. Could be wrong, but generally they blend in a little better and have that kind of natural look when they're that age and size. Now, the last place we're going to look at here is kind of the reservoir that seeps through when it's flooding. So right here, when this floods out, and this is a very steep bank that cuts down into deep water with deep logs, so this wouldn't be a bad spot to take a look and try to find some of the larger fish too, when you've got a steep bank like this, which really the sides of our aquarium kind of replicate a steep bank. They're not subtle or gradual slopes unless you have a shallow tank. So then this seeps through, and when it rains really heavily, you end up with these areas that are flooded out, and here you get areas that dry out completely. And this is not a tropical region, but if it were, this is definitely where you'd find all the little killifish and small tetras and things like that that would fill in and filter in the area, and then you would end up with lots of dead fish, honestly, when it completely dries out. But also you would end up with eggs laid in the mud, some daring catfish, or maybe like loaches trying to move in there and eat them, as well as predators coming in to scavenge whatever they can find that may be tasty that's in those shallows. But it's also pretty hard to navigate, and so the oxygen is going to be pretty low, the oxygen content for the fish. So it definitely takes a specific type of fish species to pull off surviving in those waters compared to more open waters, even if they're not moving hardly at all. Something like the water over here, which is so tannic it's dark. This is like, I was going to mention it over on the other side when we were on that bridge, but this pH can be as low as like 5.5 from the tannins in this water, even though it's getting new water daily. and it stays very humic, dark. Carbonic and humic acid are pretty heavy in this water, whereas it's more neutral coming down the stream, and it's rainwater essentially. And I don't know if you guys could make that out, but actually there was just some sort of fish about 7-8 inches long swimming quickly, a long-bodied fish that came up right where this log and the overhang comes together, where some of those little bugs are touching down. And that is, you know, an excellent feeding spot. It feels safe. No bigger things, no bears, no eagles are going to swoop down and eat it. And yet there is plenty of food coming down to its level where it can safely munch on them. So I just wanted to kind of take a little nature walk with you. I know some of you guys like this content, but I wanted to take a little nature walk and just kind of take note of a few things that maybe you might want to implement for your fish's well-being, to encourage spawning, to encourage them to eat. Maybe it's not that you're not giving them the right food. Maybe it's just that they're anxious. They are naturally not wanting to eat under a blazing spotlight that replicates them feeling like they're right in the middle of a big open body of water. If they're fish that come from a region where that big open body of water is a river, you know, a hill stream species, or like an Amazon species, where they hang out in the small tributaries, and they know it's danger when the sunlight makes it through the forest canopy, and you're out in the open water, you got dolphins and eagles and everything else that comes in there and can eat them. So just keep that in your mind when you're putting a tank together. You know, what is it that your fish eats naturally? Look up where they're from. How deep of water do they hang out in? And what kind of cover or vegetation are they expecting, as well as substrate at the bottom? And also, the last thing is just to keep in mind that lakes, ponds, they may be totally safe to drink from. Some of the cleanest water in the world comes from lakes that look like this up in the mountains and things, but there are giardia and things like that in many of these lakes as well. So I don't want to encourage anybody to literally go drinking out of any lake they find, obviously, but there is very clean water in that it has been filtered through all the cut banks of all the creeks for, you know, miles and miles and miles of flowing creek coming into bodies of water like this. And then a lot of the particulate matter settles, and then a lot of the bacteria and things clings to the rocks and the other surfaces, where the open water you've got is very clean, or where the fast moving water can also be very clean at times. And here we just had another fish surface and actually snag some sort of insect right off of one of these branches coming into the water. Very small fish, but it's interesting to watch where they're feeding. Go to your local bodies of water and just see where they're feeding. It doesn't even need to be, I mean, we're not in the tropics. We are in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, in the city. And we can still take away lessons if we watch and keep our minds open, as well as our eyes and ears. All right, guys, thanks so much. I will talk to you next time, and I hope you have a great day. Goodbye.